job, which is to come in after all the hard work has been done and read the wonderful fruits of your labour and comment on them. So thanks for the privilege. I know to the editors, Delaney, Chelsea and Lloyd, and to Austin and colleagues who run this society, the fact that you can progress your interest in international law while studying and holding down jobs, etc., is really inspirational. And the work that you do is really important for us at the university because you keep the interest in international law alive. So thanks so much for all the wonderful work that you do. I really enjoyed this year's issue of the journal, and what I think I see, having read it over the past few years, is I think I see maturity coming through, and quite a wide range of contributors, not only from within UWA but elsewhere, and I think that's really important. And one of the things that I particularly liked about this year's issue was the diversity of topics that you cover, because some of them deal with perennial issues in international law. For example, Alexander's piece on the value of soft law, really interesting and an ongoing area of discussion in international law. But then you also engaged with some of those really complex and contemporary areas in international law, as well as what we might call sort of emerging areas in international law. And I'm thinking particularly there of Alessandro's paper on direct participation in hostilities, and also Marcus's paper, and I have to read the title because it's just wonderful, isn't it? Shaky Foundations, Killer Robots and the Martins Clause. So, you know, what that has managed to do is just span such a broad range of issues. And the other interesting part of it is quite a lot of comparative content in this year's issue, which I think is really important as well, and some really good analysis of methods through Benjamin's article. So I feel like you've covered a lot of ground, and probably there's something in it for everyone, which is really good, and it's not too narrow. So there's a huge scope there for lots of different scholars to pick up the journal and learn something from it. I think a few of the themes that interested me and what kept coming back in a number of the articles was this tension between international law and international politics. And in fact, as you know, some scholars would argue that international law sits inside international politics, and of course others will try to argue that they are two completely separate fields and should not, never the twain shall meet. But I think there's a really clear sense of the importance of international politics in this issue, very well set out by Samara in the article on Timor-Leste, but also coming through in a number of other articles. Carla's article on the World Trade Organization and TRIPS agreement, and the disagreement between the US and the EU, for example, would be one. And then, of course, Robert's a really interesting and very you know, political and topical paper on the exercise of prerogative powers and political outcomes, and, you know, spanning a number of jurisdictions and looking at really topical issues such as Trump and Brexit. And then, of course, some of the environmental issues, which I know you'll come to, and both Erica and Alexander engage with questions of international environmental law. And we know that one of the key issues in that area and in lots of other areas of international law is political will. There are solutions, but we need the political will to make it happen. And what I might do, if we have space and time, Austin, is just then use that as a chance to maybe reflect on the relevance of international law in COVID-19 and in this particular era. Because what's interesting to me is that in general, what we have seen is a strong political will. So when it comes to something like climate change, we've traditionally not respected the opinions of experts and academics and scientists. But I feel like with COVID-19, there was a strong acknowledgement of medical expertise, for example. And so very swift action was taken that actually saved lives. And that would be interesting to reflect on in the future in terms of whether we can do something similar on other critical issues that we face, even though they may not appear as immediate. I think for all of us who are interested in international law as students and as researchers and as practitioners, I feel like actually this is an era of opportunity. I feel like a global pandemic reinforces the fact that we require international cooperation as people. This is something that knows no boundaries. It does not respect borders. And so we have had to, as nation states, we have had to adopt a cooperative approach. And I feel like that does give us some potential for the future. And I think the other thing, my particular area of research is international human rights law. And I do think what we've seen is a respect for human rights, because we have seen a prioritization of the right to life, which is enshrined in international human rights law, and of the right to health. But the other interesting sort of balancing aspect of it has been the restrictions on typically civil and political rights, but also economic, social, and cultural rights in order to protect life and to protect health. And so what we've seen is quite a lot of discussion about human rights. And that, I think, has been quite a positive development. And maybe, for example, within Australia, which remains the only Western democracy without a Charter of Rights at a federal level, maybe that will be a positive that'll come from this. I think the other really interesting area, and it brings me back to my question about international politics, is how as an international community we use international law to respond to COVID-19. And we have seen quite a lot of discussion in terms of how do we investigate this. And that immediately has become a very politicized issue. So we've seen Australia's call for an investigation being not well supported by other states, and we've seen China react very badly to that and allegedly introducing trade restrictions as a result, etc. And yet what we have seen now through the World Health Organization is a resolution that was put forward by EU countries, but supported by Australia and ultimately China and I think over 120 other countries, which will investigate COVID-19, perhaps in a less targeted way, not specifically just focusing on China's role, but a more holistic approach. So look, really interesting times for international law. I kind of imagine, if I had a crystal ball, that I might see some of these topics coming up in your subsequent issues of the journal. But Austin, I'll finish up there. I'm really interested to hear from the editors who must have had some wonderful insights into these pieces as they worked through them. So thank you.